Hello, and welcome to the Pancake Podcast. For a bit of context, I act as a guide and aim to give voice to marginalized communities who do not often have a chance to tell their experiences of navigating life and finding themselves. Until May, most of the interviews will focus on marginalized students experiencing existing in an academic environment and in industries that hold many traditions and history that is exclusive in terms of uplifting people of color, queerness, and disability. Today's interview centers a trans man's experience in university and how his identity has informed the work he has done as an actor. I hope you enjoy.
So name, age, and what you do for uni?
So my name is Jason Daly. I am 21 years old and I do acting. I'm third year at AUV.
At AUV.
My final project at the moment, I'm working on a show, a devised piece, and that is going to be about women in history, and it's called Tectonic. It's in May, so come see. Yeah, you sort of like create your own character and you create your own story within a devised piece that you do with a lot of other people. So
it starts out sort of like sorry, I'm horrible at theater.
It's okay, don't worry. It's so hard to describe as well.
Impromptu.
Like it's like sort of improvisational. You sort of throw ideas out there, you try things, you talk about it, you talk about what's important to you, what's important at the time. So I know our focus is about like women in history, as I've just said. So we'll discuss, I know that we're going to talk about the women in our lives. I'm going to talk about my mum, and we take a song. Yeah, so for this specific project, I'm not really sure as of yet. That's something that I've got to kind of research myself. But in previous projects, my identity has been something that I've wanted to incorporate a lot more. Through my first shows at uni, I didn't really I was kind of not ashamed of my identity, but it wasn't something that I wanted to publicise into my theatre work. But then, as I got into my second year, I started to, I did a written piece about, it was an interview with a trans man, and I put his work into a monologue, and then did another monologue based off his words and his experience. And I started exploring trans theatre, and it was just something that isn't done a lot. There is just not a lot of work of trans identities. Then for my project that I've just finished in February, I did a whole narrative about trans, my own coming out story, and I did that with two other people on my course, and we created a narrative about coming out and that experience you have, and that was really cool to do, because I got to create my own. It was my own story, but it was with putting the whole community into one character, but without it being generalised. That was kind of cool to do. You were just basically, you're trying to find a way to say, this is who I am, this is my identity, please don't judge me, but also being you shouldn't have to judge me, because it's not something that's different, it's just who I am.
It should just be you being seen as an actor instead of either typecast or placed in a role that is not you know?
Yeah, because typecasting is something that's just prevalent a lot in the industry, and you will, if you're not conforming to a certain way, sometimes you do fear the idea that typecast will only give you the roles that are, a minority, or you are just given a role because you are trans, so you can play that trans character.
Diversity hire.
Yeah, diversity hire, and it's there is that worry, but there's also that thing that you don't want to hide who you are, who you are, because it is part of your experience. It's part of your. Because being trans, you do learn a lot about yourself. I think I've learned a lot from research, because being somebody who is trans identifying, I didn't know a lot about the trans community. There was so many things. I didn't know a lot about the history and the whole how trans women started pretty much the whole gay movement. the next project I'm working on, I think trans women deserve a place in that story, because the erasure of trans history, I think that's something that I've learned a lot about, is the erasure of people who are like me, and thinking that this is some new wave, but it's not. It's just people have been deemed as mentally ill, or which is something I did know, I was very aware of, but it's like that idea of to what extent it has been done into all industries. Like, I'm doing my research at the moment on musical theatre and trans characters in musical theatre, and there is, I can count on the number of on my one hand how many trans characters that are specifically categorized as a trans character that are in musical theatre, and it's just seeing
instead of being like headcanon.
Yeah, like instead of it being like a character that does have trans characteristics but is clearly a joke.
Yeah.
Like, it's clearly for comedic, like Tootsie, for example, which is what my entire dissertation's on, is seeing that it's how much of an identity is made into a joke. I watched Disclosure with Laverne Cox, and she is just, I think, she has been like a prime example of how things are starting to progress to representation being needed. Like, it's not like, oh, we need representation, it's like, now we need to put it into place and be done. And they're just, or trans women are often cast as just cis men, and it's like that idea that you're not just erasing the history of these characters, but you're also erasing the representation that they are receiving. And it's very small amounts of representation, so to take that away, yeah, that's something that I've realised has been massive. Yeah.
Sorry. I know with Disclosure, because that was what most of my final project last year was based around.
Yeah.
Just that people like Michelle Rodriguez, who plays in Pose, I believe. Pose is an extremely hard-hitting Netflix series, I believe.
Yeah.
That kind of starts to tell the history of ballroom, trans POC, the whole movement in the 80s for AIDS awareness.
Yeah.
There's so many different things that are an issue currently that still were in the 80s. But yeah, the trans representation throughout film and TV's history has not been good or prevalent, even in like the L word. I know the L word is really popular, but then the first consistent representation of a trans man in television was shown to be aggressive and misogynist and kind of just an all-around bad stereotype. You have a lived experience as one quote-unquote gender pre-transition, and people do see you that way while you're having an internal experience of being trans. And I think it's very difficult for people to realize that you do understand both sides.
Yeah, so I think one thing I've been looking into recently is like applying for like agents, that's it. Yeah, so I've been looking at agents and like theatre companies that are specifically LGBT friendly, because there is like a list that is like, oh, these are friendly, and it's like, what do you mean they're LGBT friendly? Does that mean they've just got another gay person on the books, or does it mean that they won't discriminate or typecast me? Like, what does that define? But that's a whole different story. Like, a lot of it is just feel like performative activism, like people just trying to, now that they know that people are starting to understand the difference in pay, the difference in hiring and who can be hired and what criteria, they are putting that out there as, oh, we don't do that. But I think some of the places definitely do that. Like, they're telling the stories of these people, and it's definitely something I want to look into, because there aren't many trans theatre companies. There's companies with trans people in it, and I think creating a collaborative space that's also safe to tell those narratives, because sometimes you can want to tell your narrative, but you can have cis males there that maybe want to tweak your story, or they want to make it more susceptible. But I think with a place where you are inclusive and it is a diverse place, it makes you say, like you said, there is that unique understanding of both sides and human rights. You do have a wider understanding of the turmoil both genders go through. So I think it is something I'd like to do, is project more narratives. Not a completely trans theatre company, like that's doing the opposite. But I do think creating a safe space is something that is so needed in an industry that is still working really hard to get to a place where it can be classified as diverse. Because I don't think the acting industry is even close to a place that I would classify as diverse. So coming out for me was challenging in a plethora of aspects, and it was filled with a lot of anxiety. And I remember it being a lot of research, and it's understanding that everybody's not had that research, and going out into a town where there wasn't another trans person that I could go and talk to about my trans identity. It became quite a lonely place, and coming down to here was the opposite of that, and being in a place where you could just be yourself without it being questioned, or without people asking you 1,000 questions, or people shouting insults at you across. I mean, that still happens, and I'm probably very lucky, but it's a completely different experience coming from somewhere where everybody knows everybody, and it's. I thought coming here I would have more prejudice than I did. And then seeing the impact, like even just existing has on like people that I know, like my friends, and seeing them change. Like I think it's been, yeah. Sorry, I'm just having my own realization here. People seeing you exist and thinking that's brave, just for existing, has been something that has hit me a lot whilst being down here. Because back home it was surviving, but here it's living. And I think people notice that in you, and they're just like, wow, that's incredible. And then it's like, but it's not incredible, I'm existing for who I am. For the future, I think there's that fear that things will start to go back to what they were. I think with what's happening in Texas and in, like, places across the world, there's so many trans laws that have come into effect in America, and even in the UK, like Boris Johnson just recently coming out and saying, I can't remember what he said specifically, so I don't want to say it verbatim, but he said something quite transphobic. And just knowing that that's somebody who's in charge of our government, that's scary. And it is scary, but it's also really hopeful. Seeing so many people that I saw as like shy and scared, like now come into themselves and be their own identity because of seeing others who are trans and seeing others who are gay and seeing others who are like them. I think that makes me really hopeful for the future. Yeah, I think I'm hopeful for the future now. Scared, but hopeful. So, yeah.
That was really great, actually. Thank you so much.
That concludes today's episode of the Pancake Podcast. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing and following to keep up to date with this ongoing project. Apologies for my voice as well. I am currently ill, but I will be releasing other episodes in the upcoming weeks. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.